Hello and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast that downloads everything you need to know about the day ahead on the campaign trail.
My name is Jack Blanchard of Politico. With me as always is Sam Coates of Sky News. It is day 26 of this election campaign. And oh my God, Sam, there are only 17 days to go until polling day.
You're going to miss it when it's over.
You really won't. You won't miss the early starts. It doesn't feel like a very long way off now. Did you have a sort of halfway break? Have you been asleep all weekend?
Basically, yes. No, managed to have a little bit of a breather. I think last week was the most frenetic it's going to get on the election campaign trail until the week of the election itself. So it's quite good to have a breather and do Father's Day. I'm very pleased to report that I beat both of my children at mini golf.
That is a bold statement when you have no idea what's going to happen over the next 2 weeks. I would love to say I had a restful break, but I spent Saturday at my 5-year-old's birthday party, so with just loads of little kids running around screaming at each other, my toddler sort of pooing everywhere because he's being potty trained. It was not that unlike being on the election campaign trail, to be honest. I feel like I'll have more of a break this week. But anyway, we better get on with it. There is a lot going on still this week because we have one big more manifesto to launch, Sam. And that is the reform one that's coming today. That's going to be the big thing today. The Tories are trying to focus on warnings about a Labour majority, and Labour are going to be spelling out their plan for the first 100 days. So all the important parties are going to be doing stuff today. And it's not just that, Sam. You want to talk about postal votes as well?
That's right. We should probably give an honourable mention to the SNP's manifesto launch, which is on Wednesday. But this week is crucial for a different reason, and that's because voting's actually beginning. The first people are starting to fill in their postal votes and send them back. Look, you've got until 5 o'clock on Wednesday to register for a postal vote. Anybody who wants to can do that. Roughly 20% of people in this election are expected to vote by post, so it's a good old chunk. Whilst the most committed people are expected to go to the ballot box, quite a lot of people who will be critical will be voting by post, and it means that we're into a phase where parties will be repeating over and over and over their core messages, because there is a sizable chunk that this will be the last thing they hear. So watch how the parties do things closely this week, and it'll a bit be rinse and repeat like that until polling day, unless there's some kind of black swan that event, an unexpected event that throws everything up in the air.
Let's start off by kicking off reform, because Nigel Farage and his startup party are headed off to South Wales today. They will be launching their manifesto, except we're not allowed to call it a manifesto, at 1 o'clock in Merthyr Tydfil. Why are they saying that we can't call it a manifesto, Sam? What is the idea of this? I mean, everyone knows what an election manifesto is. Isn't it a bit confusing to call it a contract with voters?
I do enjoy the concept of Nigel Farage's I can't believe it's not a manifesto. He calls it a contract with the people because he says that there's a word association in people's minds of manifesto with lie. And I have to say, I think particularly given the Parliament just gone, quite a lot of the things that popped up in the 2019 manifesto on all sorts of things, including and especially immigration, just didn't come true. So that's not the worst campaigning technique in the world. Quite whether or not people judge the Reform UK's policies to be deliverable over a 5-year parliament, well, I think that's a question that we'll come on to. But I think it's a little bit of campaigning nuance from Nigel Farage, who I have to say has sort of not done too badly so far, working out how to land points against his rivals. And really, this is just another way of making another one.
I think what's interesting about Reform launching their manifesto, which I'm still going to call it a manifesto, sorry, Nigel, is that Reform so far have mainly been about the vibes. They've been a sort of, look, we're more right-wing than the Tories. We can get it done on immigration. If you're angry with the Conservative Party, but you don't want to vote Labour, then vote for us. I suspect quite a lot of people don't really know what most of their detailed policies are. I have certainly been refreshing what their detailed policies are over the weekend. And I think that's probably true of a lot of people in Westminster, let alone the actual voters who don't get paid to spend all weekend reading and thinking about this stuff. You know, I'm looking through this morning's playbook, which is mentioning things like a French-style insurance model for the NHS, enormous tax cuts funded by £50 billion worth of cuts to public services, things like that, which, you know, if you really put them to voters, do they actually want that. I'm not saying they're terrible ideas or good ideas, but I do feel like there hasn't been any scrutiny at all on this party's real policy platform so far. I wonder if that'll change today, or is it the case actually that we in the media are now obsessed with this narrative about Tory collapse and right-wing voters, or just disenchanted voters, frankly, flocking to reform, that even now on the launch of their manifesto, the real scrutiny of their policies just isn't really going to happen in this election campaign. What do you reckon?
Well, it's interesting to compare and contrast with the Lib Dems, who put a huge amount of thought into the minutiae of the manifesto that they produced. And I sort of waved the manifesto at Ed Davey last week and said, look, come on, not a single one of these ideas is actually going to come true if the polls are right and we get a big Labour majority. And he sort of said, look, hang on a second, it's perfectly possible for the government of the day to pick up ideas that are in other parties' manifestos. And I half wonder whether that isn't the sort of slight game plan of Nigel Farage, just to put pressure on the other parties to endlessly come up with tougher variants closer and closer to Reform UK's policy platform of things like a plan on immigration, pointing endlessly to polling suggesting that it's a big issue of public concern. What I think is really interesting about what Reform are doing today is they are pivoting quite quickly towards also attacking the Labour Party. Look, they've gone to sort of basically the birthplace of sort of part of the world that once upon a time was represented by Michael Foot. That area, Merthyr Tydfil, Blanchard, Gwent, has a long, honourable kind of Labour tradition rooted in the sort of coal mines. There was a 2006 by-election where the kind of Tony Blair's party was sort of ousted by an independent, Di Davies. So they can make the argument that, you know, independent insurgents can win here. And I think that all of that in that area is a resonant story. Nigel Farage looking to capitalise on that. I have to say, for the first time, Jack, this weekend, I was picking up Labour folk talking about the impact of Reform as well. Not so much on this election, where it seems to sort of broadly benefit them, but the point was made to me that if Reform UK end up in second place in quite a lot of seats, which I don't know at the moment how possible that is, and we'll have to wait and see, then that could change the conversation as well. As you know, in terms of the direction that a Labour government might take, there is a chance that Reform end up not getting any seats and having minimal impact, but there is a chance that Reform does reshape the political, you know, dynamics of the country on the basis that other parties continue, like the Tories are doing, to respond to the way that they operate.
You and I are old enough to have spent many years following Nigel Farage's different political parties over the years. You'll remember going to all sorts of UKIP events in the early 2010s and Brexit Party events in the late 2010s. And what tends to happen at these kind of moments, when everyone really pays attention and they try and do something serious, like launch a manifesto, is that bits of it often tend to fall apart because they haven't really been thought through properly. And I do wonder if we might see a little bit of that today or this week. You might have heard Nigel Farage on the Today programme after he took over as party leader, being challenged on this reform policy to process asylum seekers in British overseas territories. As soon as he got asked in detail about that policy, he basically abandoned it live on air and said, yeah, it's not very practical, we'll have to rethink that one. That's the kind of thing that doesn't convince people that you're a serious political party that's ready for opposition or anything else. We've seen a candidate today, the guy who was supposed to be standing against Kemi Badenoch in whatever her new seat's called, the Saffron Walden, has been, well, he's basically resigned from Reform over previous comments he made that were unearthed by the Times newspaper today, which is great for Kemi Badenoch because it means she's got a clear run at a seat that really ought to be a Tory safe seat, but who knows what a Tory safe seat is anymore. But it's also, again, indicative of a party that hasn't done great vetting of its candidates, and this was something that we saw a lot with UKIP, and I suspect we'll see more of over the next few weeks as well, the people having to pull out or get fired by the party because they just haven't got the infrastructure to do serious policy development or serious candidate vetting like the other parties do. And I just think these are stories that will crop up again and again now over the next few weeks as people pay a little bit more attention to reform in a serious way.
Well, I look forward to going to Merthyr Tydfil the moment that I finish this podcast to find out exactly that. It is shaping Tory politics, undoubtedly. Rishi Sunak's also been on his travels. It's something of a Freudian slip there. On his way back from the G7 in Puglia, 2 nights in a very nice hotel. The Prime Minister said in a huddle that he wasn't against assisted dying in principle. Well, that's that's one of the things this election campaign is about. He'll be up in East Yorkshire, the East Midlands, and the east of England, so covering quite a lot of miles later today, on the theme of Labour's energy plans and an attack on those, saying that there's a £4.5 billion budget black hole in lost tax revenues from the way that they would pursue clean energy plans at the expense of traditional fossil fuels. This is part of a fundamental kind of shift in the way that the Tory campaign is operating. I perhaps slightly didn't see it and didn't embrace it strongly enough last week when it came up from Grant Shapps. I thought it was more of a incremental pattern, but something has definitely changed in the Tory campaign to focus almost all of the kind of resource on Labour attack. So, for instance, I don't think we're going to hear a lot more about national service. And the Tory campaign point to an evidential base for this change of tactic. They point to some YouGov polling that says that 87% of Tory voters think a big Labour majority will be bad for the country. So every time they start going on about you've got to be careful about giving Labour too much power in the next Parliament. This is because they think that it'll work with their base. But also 80% of Reform voters think that a big Labour majority would be bad for the country, and even 29% of Lib Dems. So they think in terms of a laser-targeted way of trying to bring back some of the voters who are problematic for them. I think that this is now a determined campaign from people at the top, and you saw it in the weekend papers all the way through.
You're absolutely right. And our lobbying reporter, John Johnson's been looking at some of the online campaigning the Tories were doing. A story he did last week, more than 90% of their online ads, I think it was like 95%, were all attack ads focused on Labour, really very starkly contrasted with Labour's own online advertising. I'm talking about Facebook ads, Google ads, YouTube ads, with Labour's ones largely focused on their own candidates. They're on trying to sell Keir Starmer and the story of the son of a toolmaker and all of that stuff. The Tory ones are all about the Labour Party, and it reminded me of those 1997 posters, Sam, New Labour, New Danger. I guess in this point in the cycle, if you're this far behind, really fear of the unknown is one of the last great tools that you can wield as a part of a campaign. If your campaign policies, and we've had tax cuts, and we've had national service, and we've had all the other things, that big manifesto that Rishi Sunak unveiled last week, if none of them shift the dial at all, and it's pretty clear from every poll that they haven't, then what else have you got but essentially Project Fear? And that has worked sometimes. We saw in Scotland where the term was branded that fear of the unknown was a very effective message in the end for the Better Together campaign. Less effective, famously, in 2016, Vote Leave. It doesn't feel like it's going to be enough to change the outcome of this election, but I guess for a lot of Tories now, this is about squeezing that Labour poll lead and getting it down and down and down as far as they can, stop this becoming what some people at the weekend were calling an extinction-level event for the Tories.
I think it also is a reflection of the... Oh, gosh, there's a not dressed person on the other side of the window. Anyway,
oh my goodness.
Anyway,
this is the danger of podcasting at 5 to 7 in the morning.
Anyway, sorry. What was I going to say? And one of the things that's coming, and one of the other reasons for the shift, I think, is that Rishi Sunak and his team are coming under quite a lot of heavy fire. The Times front page quotes cabinet ministers warning of, basically Rishi Sunak wasting time in this campaign. I'm picking that up too, quite strongly. There are two criticisms. First of all, what is the point in going on about all those big picture policies nobody believed that the Tories were going to win, so wasn't that just wasted days? And secondly, there is upset that Rishi Sunak can't land a message. In other words, repeat it sufficient that people actually notice. And I think one of the big things that's happening is the Tory party is trying to calibrate a bit about how it deals with now and a bit about how it deals with after. But it is interesting that the line that I kept getting from Tories was, why doesn't he go in harder on Starmer and Farage, and particularly on Farage? There is just a nervousness to attack it and to attack him because of where the Tory party might go later. Can I just tell you one thing that I think is fascinating, Jack, that I'm starting to pick up? And it's about the role of Boris Johnson in this campaign. We had been expecting him to do a couple of events. I'm not sure that's nailed down anymore. But previously, I think the assumption by Boris Johnson was that Nigel Farage wouldn't play any big role in this campaign. And then maybe after the election, there could be some kind of accommodation that sees Nigel Farage come into the Tories. I think the assumption of Boris Johnson now is that Nigel Farage has played such a role pushing the Tory party towards potential extinction that it would be, if Boris Johnson wanted to sort of hop back into the party, more beneficial for him to try and block Nigel Farage and use that as an argument, let's stop this guy who's been, stopping Tory MPs from being elected, from coming into the party. And I think there's been a pivot in the way that some people are thinking about Farage and his role in the Tories post-election that has changed in quite a significant way. And I'm just starting to get a feeling that it might be a little harder should Nigel Farage want to go in post-July the 4th, if he does get elected in Clacton. And I think it's harder to see him actually making that pivot into the Tory party. So there's all sorts of things going on below the surface, reflected, I think, in an existential angst at the moment in how the Tory party is campaigning.
Another reminder, if you needed one, that the Tory party after this election are going to be even more interesting than the Tory party during this election. We better talk very, very quickly about Labour. We haven't got very long, Sam, but they're talking about their plans for green investment today. They're doing a whole week of campaigning on the economy. You do suspect, though, that the things that they don't want to talk about are going to be chasing them around today. Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves are doing a joint event this morning. They haven't done very many of them, but Rachel is going to get asked about Brexit because she has given this big interview to the FT where she talks about getting a better deal, as she puts it, than Boris Johnson did on UK-EU relations. Brexit, the topic very much that Labour is not meant to be talking about at all. She's gone and done it. That means that there'll be questions all day because the Tories do see this as an attack opportunity. They obviously think Keir Starmer's a big Remainer, and they think there is still some mileage in hammering away at that one, even though Brexit really is this incredibly topic that just nobody has mentioned in this campaign at all so far. It's like the big elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. Neither party's really gone for it, but I think we may see some discussion of it today. Sam, have a wonderful time in South Wales. We better wrap this up. Have you got anything else exciting to tell us about your journey there?
No, we're just going off into the unknown. I packed a number of shirts and let's see what happens next.
I'll see you from whatever hotel room or house you end up in tomorrow morning. Thanks very much, man.
Bye-bye.